Hello everyone. Today I was hoping we could chat about mimicry and what mimicry is, and also talk about two different forms of mimicry. One is Muellerian mimicry and one is Batesian mimicry. All right, so first off, in biology, what do we mean by mimicry? Well, mimicry is the process where one species evolves to resemble something else. There are a ton of different versions and different examples and different forms that mimicry can take. Sometimes it is one species looking like its prey, and so it can get closer and closer and closer to that prey and have more success at eating them. Sometimes it can be one species resembling not so much one other specific species, but it's sort of a concept. For example, moths that have eye patches on their wings. They're not trying to look like a specific other organism, but they are trying to get the idea of eyes across in the hopes that maybe that distracts an incoming predator enough to give them a chance to escape. So generally speaking, that is what mimicry is. One species evolving to resemble something else. Now, there are two forms of mimicry that are fairly common, pretty widespread, and very well studied, very intensely studied. And those are the two that I want to talk about today. One is Muellerian mimicry. And this is where one species evolves to change into another species that shares a characteristic. So in particular, this is warning defensive mimicry. So this is where an organism that is dangerous in some way to its predators wants to signal that, wants to help reinforce that idea. Hey, don't mess with me. I'm not good for you. I will sting you, I will bite you, I will poison you, I will just taste terrible. Something like that. Something like that that's a signal, and it's an honest signal, which in evolutionary terms means that it is signaling something that actually genuinely exists. So a species of butterfly, say, that is terribly, terribly, terrible tasting to its predators might look a certain way. Monarch butterflies are a great example of this. Bright orange and black coloration, very flashy, very dramatic, and in fact, very noxious tasting to birds that eat them. All right, so they want to signal that, and being black and orange like that, that's an honest signal. Hey, watch out. But sometimes if another species shares those characteristics, is also noxious and terrible tasting, if those two species come to resemble one another, that helps both of them. They're both sending that same signal to those predators. Hey, neither one of us tastes good. And so this is exactly what's happened with the monarch butterfly and another species called the viceroy butterfly, which is also orange and black, dramatic, and also tastes bad. In fact, may taste even worse than a monarch by some research. So here are two species that are kind of reinforcing one another. They're both signaling kind of in the same way that they have the same characteristic, and they're warning their enemies of this. So this is Muellerian mimicry. And some really interesting things can happen with Muellerian mimicry. One of which is the formation of things called mimicry rings. And this is where, once you have that initial pair of species that are honestly signaling that they share a characteristic, and they're signaling it in kind of the same way, that once that's established and stable, that it becomes advantageous for other species that share that characteristic, and that's important. They have to share that characteristic. It's got to be honest. But other species that do share that characteristic can start also drifting towards signaling in the same way. And thereby, all the species gain the advantage of telling their predators, hey, none of us are good for you. None of us taste good. We're all dangerous. And you should avoid the whole lot of us. So an example of this is poison dart frogs in Central and South America. These are small frogs. They all have a very similar body shape. They're all about the same size. They're all quite brightly colored. And so it's thought that this might be a great example of a mimicry ring where more and more species have sort of drifted towards the same general idea of being small frogs that are really brightly colored. And while the exact color and pattern changes, it still might work out well to all of the species of frogs benefit, because potential frog predators, if they see a small, brightly colored frog, they don't need to worry about exactly what color it is. They know, avoid all of them. So it's a good example of a mimicry ring that is formed through Mullerian mimicry, this honest signaling that multiple species can share and thereby all benefit. So while Muellerian mimicry is where two species mimic each other honestly, because they both actually share the characteristic that they're trying to signal about, Batesian mimicry involves bluffing. Batesian mimicry is where one species evolves to look like another species, but it doesn't share those characteristics. It's piggybacking off of the idea that this species over here is noxious, is poisonous, is dangerous in some way. And it is trying to signal to its predators, hey, don't eat me. Whereas this other species is saying, hey, if I just kind of look like that species, maybe predators will avoid me too. And it has the advantage of they don't have to worry about actually evolving the trait, actually worrying about devoting resources to being poisonous, to being noxious. They can just look like they are, and maybe the predators will believe them. So a great example of this that I see often in Central California are these little things called hoverflies. And some hoverflies are beautifully patterned with little black and yellow stripes. And sort of, they look like they're pinched into the waist a little bit. They look a lot like wasps, but they aren't wasps. Wasps are dangerous. You mess with a wasp, it's going to bite you. It's going to sting you. It might be very painful for you. And that black and yellow coloring on a wasp is genuine, honest signaling. They're saying they're dangerous, and they actually are. These hoverflies, which are not dangerous at all, look like the wasp, and so try to trick their predators, try to trick their enemies into thinking, hey, ooh, I'm scary. I will bite you. I'll sting you. Although they don't actually have any venom. They don't have a stinger. They haven't evolved these structures and these compounds. So they're just faking it. And I've seen this work a bunch of times. Lots of times humans will see a hoverfly come over and they will avoid it. Oh no, oh, scary, dangerous thing. So that fly definitely gains a benefit, an advantage from looking like the wasp. So they're bluffing it though, right? They're not actually dangerous at all. So that is Batesian mimicry, where one species is faking it to look like an actually dangerous species. And some really interesting things have been found with Batesian mimicry. It's a really good example of something called frequency-dependent selection, which is a great term in evolutionary biology. And it basically means that how something evolves depends kind of on how common it is. The frequency matters. So, and you can see how this is going to work out with Batesian mimicry. If there are lots and lots and lots of hoverflies, picture an example where there are tons more hoverflies than there were wasps. Well, that's not really going to work well, because predators, say flycatchers, other insect-eating birds, are going to see little black and yellow insects. They're going to eat them every once in a while. And if they're mostly hoverflies, that's going to work out just fine for the bird. They're going to get a meal out of it. And sure, every once in a while they might hit a wasp, and that might be a bad day. But most of the time, they're safe. Most of the time, they're going to just eat flies, and they're going to be fine. Then the mimicry isn't working. It's not doing the thing that selection has favored it to do. And that's because of this frequency dependency. The hoverflies have to be uncommon enough in comparison to the wasps that most of the time you want to avoid the black and yellow thing, because that's going to be genuinely bad news for you. And if that means occasionally you miss a meal of something harmless, well, it's cost of doing business. So the mimic has to stay kind of less common than the model that they are trying to evolve to sort of mimic and look like. So frequency-dependent selection is something that's really interesting, and it plays out often in evolution. And with Batesian mimicry, it's a great example. And in fact, it's one of the first times that it was modeled and really sort of thought of as a concept was with Batesian mimics, in particular butterflies in South America. So there's a little bit about evolution and a couple of the really interesting different forms that mimicry can take. Muellerian mimicry and Batesian mimicry. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a little something. Thanks for watching. And until next time, enjoy the natural world.